This is Progress Canada, presented by Lightbulb Narrative. Today we're joined by Robin Jones, three-term Mayor of Westport and President of the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me today. I'm really excited about our conversation.
Okay, so I want to take a step back before we get into some of the stuff we're going to talk about today. And I want to talk about your background. So you started your political career in municipal politics. You were a councillor and you've been a mayor for a number of terms now in Westport. Why did you decide to enter municipal politics, and what's been the most rewarding thing since you got involved?
The decision to enter politics, I really can't base it on anything. I had been a career police officer and had finished my career as a chief of police in Northern Ontario. I moved to a village where I knew nobody. I only knew two people in all of Eastern Ontario. I have no family, but I did want to become a potter. And soon moving into the village of Westport, one of my two people that I knew had a colleague who was a potter who was just setting up classes. And so I started that. And then at the same time in the village, getting to know a few people, there was an opportunity. The previous mayor had passed away. And so they were going to run a by-election to fill that spot. And I've had the opportunity in most of the jobs that I've done to be in a leadership role. And I thought that I felt a call to continue to provide that sort of support now in a different setting rather than in a police agency, and decided to run for council. Did some research. We're going to get into that a little bit more on how to prepare yourself, but did some research, went to council meetings, and was successful in that election. And then so that was a by-election. Then the following 3 full terms, I have been the mayor. And so for people watching, the village of Westport is in Eastern Ontario. It's an hour north of Kingston, about an hour and a half from Ottawa, but it's a hub. So although in the winter, it's an old Victorian village. Everybody always tells me how beautiful it is, and I say I take no credit for that. That's just the way all the people before me built it. But it's a busy place. Sometimes when people are thinking of moving here, and we've got quite some development going on, and people say, but what do you do in the winter? And I normally, if there's a group of people, I step back and I listen to how the locals say, oh my God, like you won't have time to wind your watch. It's so busy in the village. So I think it's getting to get in step with the people who were born and raised here. I always call them the 5 original families. There could be 7 or 8, but the Irish came over, settled the area, and so there are lots of Murphys and others here. When I first started campaigning, I would figure that the demographic on people from away and people who were true locals probably was 70 true locals, 30 from away. I think now it's flipped. So I really have been happy to be the mayor during this transition because it's been fairly smooth. We've really welcomed the people from, every place where there's building. You call it the new subdivision, so I will call it the same thing. There's been a smooth transition of people getting involved, joining churches, joining the service clubs, which we need. So I think that's what I'm taking away, is watching the growth over the last 14 years and feeling that most of the time I was in step with it.
I think, I've not been to Westport myself, and I guess I have to put it on the list. But I think communities in Eastern Ontario, specifically around that area, are very arts focused, which is why when you were talking about pottery, it didn't surprise me that this attracted you to this place, but very arts focused, and like just visually, like I think it's sort of like a Louise Penny sort of vibe as a community. Like there's these beautiful old buildings, there's a good sense of community, and it's not a huge population, but so a lot of people in the community, but it's very close knit, and seems like, I know you've done a lot of work on like pride and things like that, and it seems very inclusive and very welcoming, and I'm not surprised you've been attracted to the place or have wanted to stay in charge for so long.
But I'll tell you, one of the reasons that I think small communities like mine are that way is because we're short on resources. but we're long on volunteers. So when you're working together for whatever the community initiative is, you're not just sitting back watching public works or municipal employees doing it. You're actually rolling up your sleeves, and so I just think that increases the commitment, which is important.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, and it sort of leads into my next question about this idea of community service and expanding that into, official governance. And I think when people run for municipal office, or any office really, I've seen it, at the provincial level as well, on the federal level, is people don't necessarily understand what that 4-year commitment means. They have an idea of what a politician does, but they don't usually know what that means on the ground. So, you see the ribbon cuttings, you see the attending the council meetings, you see whatever gets put on social media, but there's a whole lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. What are the parts of the job that have surprised you the most in the time you've been in office?
I think that has surprised me the most, and hear the whole thing before you react, or for your viewers and listeners to hear the whole thing. When something happens that rubs people the wrong way, or they think it's wrong, or that probably they think council is stupid for what they've done, and there's an uproar. Of course, in today's age, social media kicks in. I think what surprises me the most is it's that those things are simply a point in time. They have a life of their own, and it's like a fire. It burns hard, and then it goes out. And so I have found that it's wiser to deal with the issue when the fire is burned out a bit. And then people are prepared to listen. Sometimes, I might have misjudged and tried to provide rationale or explanations too early, but so that was kind of a surprising thing for me. Not that it wasn't a bona fide reaction by people. You know, how do you tell people everything that you do as a mayor or as a council? How do you tell them the volumes of reports we read to prepare us to go to council and debate? And in those reports is a lot of information that's helping us make up our mind the position we want to take on something, but the public doesn't know that. So I think the strong response from the public, it will be a point in time and slow down a bit, and then the public is more likely to listen to some of the explanations on what they thought was a poor decision or not that. So that's probably not what you expected me to say, but as the head of council, I've never react to media. That's probably that police training. But when somebody blows up on something, and I don't reply to the newspaper, I don't reply to the op-eds in the newspaper, and I don't reply online. I just don't think that that's good for the reputation of the corporation, for the village. But there'll be a point in time when I can make better use of the time and let people know what was actually going on. Does that help? Does that answer what you were going at?
It does, because I think even just like as a communications professional, there's a desire to always respond like immediately to things to make people feel heard and seen
Mm.
and all that kind of stuff. But sometimes there are two schools of thought in communications. Like you'll see this in government, where there's the people who are like the press secretary type who are supposed to be responding immediately. And then there's the communications planners who are like, how about we sit back and think about how we want to respond to this, right? And sometimes that is the right answer, because you can be more thoughtful about it. You can consider all the people who are involved and trying to figure out how to get to some kind of consensus for all of them. So I think it's actually a really interesting point.
Yeah, I know there's also a line that we won't let people cross. And that line isn't what they say about us. I know we're going to talk about that in the incivility in a moment, but how they treat staff at town hall, how they treat the people who are the employees of the municipality. That's really a line in the sand for myself and my council.
I wanted to talk about the staff, and also a second ago you were mentioning all the preparation that goes into preparing for a council meeting, and there's reports that get put together, and there's all these different things. But what that all comes down to is the fact that the people who run for office and serve in elected office are not experts. So I think there's this sense sometimes that, okay, if I run
Mm.
for office, I have to have some deep financial experience, right? Like I really need to understand how government works. And that is helpful, but a lot of this you learn on the job, and a lot of this is supported by the actual paid staff. on that supports council, and you had just mentioned them. Why should lacking that experience not be a barrier to someone running, and how important is that professional staff for the functioning of the town?
So I'm going to compare it to people who want to be a police officer. They don't know anything, probably. They may have taken, I'm not sure what we call them now, law and security courses, the police foundations courses. They may have taken those, but they don't really know what it's like until they put on the uniform and they go and do the job. And then we teach them. They've come from college with the book learning, but then we actually teach them how to do the job and how to respond to calls and how to do proper interventions, how to keep themselves safe. It's very much the same with new people on council. Until you're actually sitting around the horseshoe, you don't really understand what's involved in the job. I would say, however, though, if people are thinking of running for council, that it's in their best interest to go to as many council meetings or committee of the whole meetings as possible. Most councils are a 2-month, two meeting a month setup, particularly in outside of the big cities, where there's one meeting that is where all the debate happens. I'm going somewhere with this, and that's called the committee of the whole. That's where the debate really, really happens. And then there's, generally speaking, a couple of weeks, and then the council meeting, and that's where decisions are made and bylaws are made. And it's that 2 weeks in between that gives everybody around the horseshoe the opportunity to speak to the public. The public first heard about the issue at committee of the whole, and they may offer their opinion. So my suggestion is go to a committee of the whole meeting as often as you can, because you'll actually see live the debate, and you'll also get a sense of the atmosphere that happens inside the horseshoe. When it comes to financial matters, you're going to learn that from the auditor. You're going to learn that from the treasurer. You're going to learn that from the clerk. Please don't let that throw you off. And always around every either board I sit at, your listeners are going to be nodding when I say this, around every table, whether it's a board, a committee, a project group, or council, someone is a brainiac when it comes to money. Somebody is doing the math in their head while somebody's speaking, just the same as somebody else will be a brainiac about water or wastewater. They will have been a plumber or something in their life, and they'll bring those skills to the table. So there's lots of things that people are doing in their day-to-day lives that's transferable. Don't let that intimidate you at all. But you can go to the committee of the whole meetings or the council meetings to get a sense of what it actually feels like.
So the committee of the whole is a really good thing to bring up, because when people run for office, they have an agenda that they want to get done, and that's the reason they're running, which is a good thing. But when they get into office, turns out, like everything else, you have to work with those around you, and there is a group of people that you have to find consensus with and actually deliberate with on different decision making. And even if you're a mayor with strong mayor powers, you actually can't just unilaterally do things in government when you run for office. So what should potential candidates know about the deliberative and consensus nature of decision making on councils before they run and put their name on a ballot?
So it really depends on the council itself and the head of council and how they run a meeting. I and many of my colleagues are much less Robert's rules and much more consensus building. So when I say Robert's rules, that is a very specified timeline to speak. Unless you're saying something brand new, you only get one opportunity to speak. And I think many of us go the other way, that we keep it in check. It's not a conversation. It's still a very organized, discerned discussion. But we let people have some not just let there be some interaction, but encourage interaction so that brings everybody's points out. But it depends, either happen or both happen in council chambers. Regardless, to go back to your question, whether it's a council of 13 members or a council of 5, it takes a majority to get your position across. And even the head of council or the mayor only has one vote. So it is really important to for the issues that you may want to change, there's a whole process for how you even get that to the table. You just don't go to council and say, I'm just going to say a dog park, if that's what you want in your community. At a committee of the whole, you can't say during something like the announcements or member reports, you can't say, "Oh, I want to talk about a dog park." There's a whole process to follow that follows your thought that you will learn about. So that can be frustrating. People, think that it should be quick. It's not. It's not. You got 4 years, and you'll use every day of it for sure. But then you have to also find the middle ground, because you cannot talk to members of the council that advances council business if it's a quorum. So let's just go back to easy numbers. A 5-member council, you want to get your dog park through, and you can talk to one member about that. You've got the notice of motion, it's coming up. You could talk to one member about that before council, but if you talk to a third, it's considered an illegal meeting. So those things you will be taught. Not to throw anybody off, but just to really manage public expectations, that there are some rules that are hard and fast, and that is one of them. So you do your consensus building by being really well prepared and practicing. Many of my colleagues write their notes down when people are talking and they think they want to respond. You can see them writing, so that when they get the opportunity to speak, they really get the best bang for their buck.
In your experience, has that shortened your to-do list when you're running each time, or are you, still just as ambitious and publicly stating what those things are, or recognizing how limited the time is and how long the process can be? Does that shrink your list a bit?
I don't think so, because there's always something new, and many people run for mayor because there's some sort of crisis in the community, and so that's for me. It was a wastewater system, and so a lot of effort and time and energy goes into resolving that. But it's like anything else. Once that's well on its way, then there are other issues that come up. Whether you're a village, a community the size of my village, or you're the size of Ottawa, Hamilton, Toronto, we all have housing issues. We all have infrastructure challenges. We all have homelessness. And so it's proportionate to the size of your municipality, but it's also proportionate to the size of your tax base. So yes, there's never enough money to do what people want. So you work your way around that, whether it's through surveying people or public meetings, getting their input around budget time, so that you can prioritize what you spend your money on, because there's never enough money.
There's always an endless to-do list, of course.
That's right.
I want to talk about, you mentioned it a little while ago, this idea of feedback from voters, because some voters will praise you for the things you're doing, some will be less charitable perhaps, and you do get both when you run for office. And I've worked with enough politicians now that there are some people who it's no skin off their back. They're able to handle that criticism when it comes, because they're sure of what they're doing, or at least that they will communicate it to people and try and find a way to make people as happy as they can. And then there are some people who are just really, really sensitive to it, and it is really, really destructive to them and their identities. What's your advice to potential candidates about navigating that process? Because of course they'll engage with it once they get elected, but even on the campaign trail, it's I think a lot of people in the social media age are used to having negative feedback from other people online, but that's sort of a different reality than when your name is on the ballot and it is directed specifically at you, and it becomes very, very personal. So what's your advice for navigating that?
So I think you partly said it. First of all, you have to be authentic. You have to be real with yourself. And by the time you're old enough to run for municipal government, you should have a good sense on how thick your skin is, because it will happen. I said I was speaking at a conference in Thunder Bay this week, and we were talking about this very thing. I was asked that question while I was at the podium, and how do you kind of assess the mood of the public? And I hope you don't think this is corny, but I said it's in the wave.
Yeah.
And they said, "What do you mean that?" They got it as quickly as you just got it. I said, "What do you mean?" They said, "What do you mean the wave?" And I said, "Well, when they wave at you from their car." I said, "A full-handed five-finger wave is good. That's positive. That's a way that you can read their feedback." Because sometimes it's not. Sometimes the reality is that they're upset. They're normally uninformed, and that's why they're upset, because counselors are not dumb. They take a lot of time making decisions. Our challenge continues to be, how do we get that information out? In smaller centers, the weekly newspapers, local newspapers are gone. So how do we get that information out? But coming back to the question that you asked me, you really have to be honest with yourself. Understand that this is, unfortunately, the reality that we work in now. AMO has done so much work in the last 4 years trying to prepare people for considering running. But it's always interesting to me to see how many people don't run the second time around. Just on your point, they hang in there for the first 4 years, but would never think of running the second time and putting them through that. Yeah, so I think go into it with your eyes wide open, and if you're not cut out for it, don't put yourself in harm's way.
Right. Yeah, it is very complicated. And obviously, we could go into how much more difficult it is for women, for racialized people, all these kinds of other additional things that come up. I do want
Yeah,
to talk about
yeah.
the idea of municipal leadership sort of on a broader scale, because everyone is familiar with their local council, but there's a number of organizations that represent municipal governments at a higher level. So they're, and you've led many of them actually. So you've been the chair of the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus, the chair of the Rural Ontario Municipal Association, Roma, as most people know it, and you're currently the president of the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, AMO, as most people know it as well. Why is it so important for municipal leaders to work together province-wide as opposed to just sticking within their communities?
Well, and why are working together? And right now it is association conference time. And that's what I was in Thunder Bay yesterday for the Northern Ontario Municipal Association. Next week, I'm in Parry Sound for the small urban. I'm in Timmins soon after that for the Northeastern Ontario. So not only is it important to work together, but it's important to have this cohesive understanding of what the challenges are, and to share and have opportunities to share some solutions. We're not in it on our own, but and then how do you learn what other people have done who have addressed the same challenges that you have, and you may not have thought of those solutions on your own. So it's collaborative. It helps you with your decision making. It builds your pool of associates and colleagues that you can call on. For AMO, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario represents 444 municipalities. And we are the organization that advocates with the government on behalf of them. And so the value of having these collective associations, and another way of bringing people together, is so that we can hear and we can put forward the concerns that communities have.
So you brought up the fact that AML represents 444 municipalities, which is always, I love that number just in general. And when you tell people there's that many in Ontario, they're always shocked, because I think, most people know the really, really big ones, but they don't necessarily understand how many like villages and hamlets and all these things there are. So there's a lot of organizations that belong to AMO. Can you talk a little bit about like the sort of day-to-day work the organization does to help support municipal governance in this province?
So the largest, I would say, in three main areas: policy, business services, and then training and education, kind of lining up in my mind the people who are the directors of those areas. By far, the policy work is second to none across Canada. I also sit on the board of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and they've got a fabulous policy shop, but I put ours above them because they go to all the association meetings. They have networks everywhere to keep their finger on what's happening in the municipalities. And when policy comes from the government for us to look at, to review, make our comments on, I want it to be right. And so the policy people are brilliant. They've been in this field for a long time, and they really know their business. We often see our own policy recommendations in provincial law, because they're really, really well respected. So we couldn't work without our policy people. The business services is a section that works hard to find maybe not provincial wide, but opportunities to help municipalities do large purchases cheaper. And if not AMO, who else is going to do that? And so they work with other organizations so that we have the benefit of buying, I'm just going to say, public works trucks. But they've already done the RFP, AMO, and the business services and their partners have already done the RFP process, so we can purchase them quickly and get the best price. It's just a fabulous benefit that AMO offers to municipalities. And then the third area is our membership and training area. And every person who becomes a new counselor is encouraged to take the AMO new council training or counselor training, and it helps prepare them. But this group are the people who 4 years ago, we said to them two things. We're not getting enough people who are underrepresented youth or women running to be candidates, and we've got a really low voter turnout across the province. So we actually gave this group, we funded it to $1 million, so that over the 4 years, they would have the time to do the proper research and come up with some recommendations. So I may be able to get to it later in our discussion, but I want to make sure people understand, if they go to the AMO website, amo.on.ca, it is full of information that they need, of work lists, of workbooks, of opportunities to take free training. We are currently offering free online workshops to those three groups that you and I just mentioned: youth, underrepresented, and Indigenous. And though they are three separate groups, anybody who doesn't fall into those groups is more than welcome to go to any one of them. But the period, not a but, more than welcome to go to any one of them. We have ensured that the instructors of those workshops are also representative of the subject matter. So we've got some great young people giving the workshop on for youth to consider running for politics, and the same obviously with the Indigenous and with the underrepresented. I mean, who else would have done that but AMO? I just think I'm so proud of them, and the work is sophisticated and yet parochial. It's easy to understand language. It's not going to be difficult for anybody. And there is a workbook, Lead Where You Live, that will walk through every single thing you need to know before you run for council. Your question was, why should we work together? And that really goes back to because we're stronger together. We have more of a united voice. We learn from each other. But on top of working together, AMO really has this leadership role in many different areas to support the municipalities.
I will say, like, obviously there is strength in numbers, and if you're a small village, it makes sense to combine forces with other organizations that can help you get, like you were saying, even just on like a contract basis for services. Like, it's really helpful in that respect. And then from a policy advocacy perspective, you're going to have the province listen to you a lot more often if there's 444 of you singing from the same song sheet, obviously, than, just a village.
We hope.
600 people. You hope.
Yeah.
Not always, but, it seems to go better that way. You brought up Lead Where You Live, and I want to talk about that because number one, I think you could spend days on the AMO website with all the great content there is there, because like it is actually phenomenal.
Thank you.
And like you said, it's
Yeah.
very, very well researched, but it's also really accessible, which I think is, as a comms person, I'm very focused on making sure things are
Right.
accessible to, all viewpoints and figuring out how to access this stuff. So it's really, really good. So I will do the same call out, go to the website. It is very good. But I want to talk about lead where you live, because of course at the municipal level, at least in Ontario, in other provinces it can be different, but in Ontario there are no political parties. And what that usually means for non-incumbents, people running for the first time, or people who, have lost and come back, is that they don't, if you're running for the first time, you don't really have the same support structure to figure out how to navigate the finances of running, or, the policy of running, and all these different, even just registering as a candidate, right? Like all these little details are a lot harder to figure out when you're just on your own, as opposed to having a party apparatus behind you. So I think AMO has done a really good thing with Lead Where You Live, because it gives potential candidates basically a rundown of like what they need to do, what to expect, how to navigate
Yeah.
everything. Can you talk about that resource, and then some of the other resources that are available to first-time candidates?
Yeah, that's the ideal one. Um, when I looked ahead to considering what we were going to talk about today, I went to that document, and I've been in municipal politics for years and years, but it's just that well grounded. What people need to know around the campaign finances, it's pretty black and white. And don't color outside the lines. You'll be told what you can what you can accept donations for, what your bookkeeping needs to look like, how much you can spend. It's very, very prescriptive. So if you're a rule follower, you'll have no problem because you'll know exactly what to do. If you think, well, hell, I can do this if I want, it's the consequences are serious. The consequences are serious to the point that if there's an extreme violation of the campaign finances legislation, it could turn your win at the election into a loss and being suspended to run in the next term. So my caution of everything people are going to consider is get that right. And you can get that right by getting on your team somebody who is comfortable in taking money, doing the banking. I mean, even something as simple as somebody starting and thinking, oh, I should get my signs made. Before they read the rules, they go buy their signs out of their personal checking account. Well, you can't do that. So it would be good it's always good to have at least your campaign manager, I'll come back to that in a moment, as well as somebody who's financial that takes care of that admin for you, because there are reports that you have to do afterwards, and somebody will make that really, really easy for you. So campaign finances, you also need, when you talk about not having, that the group of supporters, you do need at least one person who you trust to stay up on things, who you trust to pick up the phone and call the clerk at town hall to say, can I do this? Can I not do this? I say the word clerk, and for people listening, that is an official job title, and that is the name of the person who runs the election in every municipality. So have somebody who is very, very comfortable doing that as well. So I think that's to tie in. Finances are paramount, and there's a lot of rules that you could break, but get somebody who you trust to help you follow the rules.
Yeah, in all the provincial politics I've been in, we've always said like be really nice to your CFO, because they are the one that can actually go to jail over these things. So they have to be very, very skillful. They have to be trustworthy. They have to, just really get what they're doing. I do want to talk about, and actually just to stay on finances for a second, this
Yep.
is something too, when we talk about donations, like I think people think like, oh, someone can just, help pay for something for my campaign. No, there are rules about how much you can contribute, when you can contribute. Like, for example, if registrations for an election don't start until May 1st in the year, which is the case for municipal elections in Ontario, you can't be donating money ahead of time. You need to be able to account for all the money that you take in. There are sometimes spending limits, like there's all these different components. What are some of the ones when you first ran, you were like, really? That's a rule?
Well, the corporations can't donate. And
Right.
so there's businesses in the village that wanted to donate, and it was the owner of the grocery store in the village who's very smart, and he said, "I'll have to give you a personal check." And I, why? And he said, because my business is a corporation, so corporations cannot donate cash to your campaign. So that was probably the one that threw me off. And there is, as you say, there's only a limit of what you can donate, and there is a limit to what you can accept. And the clerk will tell you how much money you can spend on your campaign. If you use your own money, that's part and parcel. There's a factor depending on what the assessment is and what position you're running for. You don't need to do the math. The clerk will tell you what your full budget can be, but you can't just say, okay, that's a little light, so I'm going to add a couple of $1,000s of my own. That was something that was a surprise to me, that it all has to be accounted for.
Before you even get to the part where you can accept money, one of the most important things is submitting your nomination papers, because until you do that, you're not going to be on the ballot. And until you do that, you don't really have an official relationship with the election at that point, right? Like, you're just somebody who wants to run versus somebody who is running. What should prospective candidates know about the nomination process before they begin campaigning? Because of course there are some things you have to do before you walk into the office with your papers and say, I am a candidate.
Right. And the Lead Where You Live walks you through all of them. But of course, you need to be of voting age. You need to be a resident of not just Canada, but of the municipality in which you're running. If you're in a community that has a ward system, check with your clerk, because sometimes you have to be in the ward to run. Sometimes you don't. It gets quite complicated. Seasonal people are
Right.
confusing. So you need to be a resident of the community that you're going to run in. So it's best to check what the legislation is on that for sure.
And I don't know if it differs across municipalities, but often you have to get a number of people from within the community who have residents there who sign your nomination papers as well. So you're not just some stranger entering the race, you actually have some support in the community.
Right. Now, I know you're going to trick me there, because my village is exempt because it's under, is it, are you up on that, Teresa? Is it 3,000 people and you need 25 signatures? I'm in the
Yeah,
ball.
I think that's what it is.
Yeah. And so, but read up on that or speak to the clerk. They'll be able to help you. But for sure, Lead Where You Live does cover that. A good point. That came in the last round of elections, and with a fair bit of grumbling by people, but it was really an opportunity to secure some votes, right? So if people are going to sign your paper, you think they might vote for you as well.
I mean, you hope. Sometimes they're just nice people who are helping you out, but you never know. Um, I want to talk about the social media aspect, because this is something that I guess we're now in, like, 15, 16 years of social media campaigns at this point. They are obviously increasingly more online as we go, but it hasn't, like, it's not just national politics that's online. Municipal politics is online all the time. I know in communities I've lived in, like, there will be like Facebook groups of people from that community or that ward or whatever it is, and they talk about the issues that are local all the time. And there's like actually a large sense of community online now, which means some of these campaigns actually spill out into the digital space. What should campaign teams and candidates keep in mind when they're campaigning on social media?
Well, there would be, in my world, there'd be some things that you should stay away from. And that would be anything negative, whether it's negative about the candidate, negative about something the candidate says. People don't really want to know that about you, because the other side of the coin, of things you can and should do, is so wide open. The more creative you are online, that's what people are going to remember. When I ran for president of AMO, those screens that you pull up and you normally advertise if you're out at
Yeah,
a
yeah,
mall display. Well, I took a photo of me, and it was mainly my head. And so campaigning, it got to be Big Robin and Robin, and here it's just like my big head. But not everybody in the province knew me until that campaign. But although it wasn't social media, my point was think outside the box, because our campaigning
right.
there was all done not online. But be creative. It doesn't have to cost you a lot of money. So when you're building your team, we know you're going to have somebody who's going to run your campaign. You're going to have a financial person. Find somebody who is very comfortable with social media to get your messages out as often as you can, as creatively as you can. Figure out what your key message is, like the one key message, so that they all look the same. All your messages will have that on there, not just vote for Robin, vote for Robin because of whatever. But the sky's the limit. Just be professional and be creative, because the whole reason you're doing is for the second and a half that somebody looks at it when they scroll through their messages or Instagram or whatever, you want them to remember it. And if you can, IA wasn't a real big thing when I ran 4 years ago. And I have to like my sort of like my dirty secret. I am totally fascinated by all of the dog gimmicky things that they do on Instagram today. And they've got, dogs talking to each other. And I suspect this round we're going to see some really cool things like that. There's a bull terrier and a golden who are my absolute favorites. And so people listening should understand the excitement they hear in my voice. I'm going to go to that if it's even if it's a campaign. I'm going to go to that and watch it because it's going to hold my attention. So that would be my suggestion as well.
Right. I want to go back to something that you had mentioned a little while ago, and it's this work to get a more diverse representation of municipal candidates. So,
Yeah.
AMO does a lot of that work. There's also other organizations like Equal Voice, Operation Black Vote,
Right.
all these kinds of things. Why is it so important to have people with different life experiences on a council?
Well, let me take you back to my policing career once more, because that really helps illustrate it. When I was first hired, I was part of the group of first women moving through. So I have real lived experience of being the minority, um, but with absolute conviction that my participation, my involvement added value. And it added the value because there was not almost every platoon you'd work on, most of the divisions, there was very few women. We would bring that other perception and experiences and knowledge. And it's exactly the same around the horseshoe. That if we don't have people from underrepresented communities, Indigenous people, youth, women, then we are really hearing from one segment of our community, and that doesn't represent the way our neighborhoods look. So I think that this work that we do in encouraging people to put their toe in and find out a little bit more about being a politician could be the most important work that AMO is doing for democracy at this point in time.
I think it's crucial that, our elected bodies actually represent the populations that they represent, like that.
That's
That
right.
just makes sense. It's kind of the entire point of democracy, right? So, I kudos to AMO for doing that work. I have two questions before we go. The first is for potential candidates. The second is for voters. So the potential candidates, given everything we've talked about today, and given we're about to be opening up municipal election season and registrations are going to begin, what's your message to those who are considering running but are still on the fence about running for office this fall?
So, two couple of things. Why are they on the fence? It could be on the fence because they don't know how much time it takes, and they're a young single mother with two kids. It could be what we talked about before, that they are not the type of person who they don't think they have really thick skin, and so can they handle the public scrutiny? So first of all, they have to figure out why they're sitting on the fence, and then find someone to talk to. Find people on your own council. You can certainly call us at AMO and walk through it. Talk to friends. I will tell you that uh, the opportunities to help the community. I started by saying walking onside them, and I really think that's the type of municipal leaders I want others to be as well. Yes, we know we have a certain leadership responsibility, but to walk onside people is an honor. I feel it's partly my duty, and that comes from my background, but it's also my honor to be trusted by people, and be elected 3 times to be the mayor, and that they're confident enough that I have the experience, the brains, the leadership skills, and the vision to keep them safe and their community safe. So it's if I could even be more parochial in my language, it's a blast most days, but it comes with is right. So that's an answer to that question. I think figure out why you're on the fence and pick up a phone and let someone walk you through it. They may walk you through and say, wait 5 years, wait until your kids are in school, because it is a lot of time. So that's why going to someone local on council, if not the clerk, is probably a good idea. If you don't know anybody on council, go to the clerk. Remember, that's an official person working in town or city hall, and they will find a volunteer for you on council to help you walk through that.
Really great advice. My last question before we wrap is about voters and our role in the election. So AMO has an incredible treasure trove of data on who runs for office, how successful they are, all these kinds of things. But that data also includes the voter turnout number, which unfortunately in the last cycle, the average across municipalities was about 33%, which is obviously far lower than, say, the provincial level or the federal level. What's your pitch to voters going to the polls on October 26th this year to actually participate in municipal elections, and why it's so important to be a voter in municipal elections?
So I'm not sure why people wouldn't want to have their say. They have their say often. We've talked about that after when something doesn't go the way they want at council, but it's partly the responsibility of those running to talk about real issues so that people say, I want to make sure that we elect that person because I agree with them. So voter turnout in my community is 78%.
Wow.
78%. Yeah. But that's partly because of the environment, right? We are looking at doing mail-in or electronic voting this year. I don't think that the council's approved the clerk to go ahead and examine it, mainly for accessibility or for seasonal people who can't get in, and we don't have to do the proxy votes. But people here are really concerned about who gets elected. There's a little bit of an adage in rural Ontario for any of your rural listeners. I don't know if it's the same in urban, but I will vote for the person who knocks on my door and makes the best argument. So two things. You have to be able to make a good argument, and you have to knock on the door. So for the candidates, again, that takes effort and time and commitment to make sure that voters think, what's in it for me to vote? Oh, I understand that person. I've met with that person. I think they've got a really clear head, whether it's your ward councillors or your councillors in general, but really for your mayor. This year with strong mayor's powers being in effect, it's even more important. But I do think that the responsibility is shared between those who can vote and those who are running to really put something out for the public to say, I want to make sure that that candidate gets in.
Well, I think, as far as democracy go, that's the best note to end on, is that it's a shared responsibility and we all need to come out and play our role. So I want to thank you so much for doing this with me today. I think this is a really important topic, and I'm hoping that maybe we inspire some people to participate over the course of the next 6 months in this process. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you very much. It was a lot of fun.
You've been listening to Progress Canada, presented by Lightbulb Narrative, a Canadian-owned company specializing in strategic communications, narrative development, and content creation. Our music today was composed by Elliot Middleton. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing to access future episodes the moment they drop. Thanks for listening.